Hello, everyone. Welcome to Artists in Sight, where we spotlight some of the best visual artists in the Kansas City metro area. My name is Brian Vole, and I'm the local arts librarian for Johnson County Library. Our mission for Artists in Sight is to share conversations with artists about their work, their background, and what inspires them. Artists in Sight is an extension of Johnson County Library's exhibitions program, which brings the work of the best local visual artists to the walls and spaces of Johnson County Library. Our new season of local art at the library began with the new year and will run until April 21st. Check our webpage for complete information about who's showing where and for interviews with all of our artists at jocolibrary.org/events/exhibitions. So our guest today is one of the artists that is showing at the Blue Valley Library. Her name is Hannah Fine. Hannah Fine is a visual artist based in Kansas City, Missouri, with southern roots in Atlanta, Georgia. She works with a variety of materials like glass, wood, acrylic, resin, food samples, metal, and ceramic, while often utilizing photography and processes in digital fabrication to create her works. She earned a BFA from the Kansas City Art Institute in sculpture in 2017. Her work has been shown in recent exhibitions at Monarch Glass Studio, the American, H&R Black Art Space, and Curiouser and Curiouser. She has had works published in Likewise Magazine, issue number 2, as well as the Literary Arts Journal, Sprung Formal, issues 11 and 12. After graduation, Hannah was awarded the Black Fellowship with the H&R Black Art Space from 2018 to 2019, as currently works at the David T. Beals III Studio for Art and Technology. This is quite an introduction, Hannah. Hannah's 3D and 2D work comes to us through our partnership with the Kansas City Artists Coalition and will be available now until April 21st. And like I said, that's at the Blue Valley Library on 151st Street. All right, Hannah, thank you for joining us. It's great to have you.
Thank you so much for having me. Thanks to you and the Blue Valley Library and the Kansas City Artists Coalition for this opportunity and for giving me a space to chat a bit about my work.
Yes, and there's a lot to talk about. Yeah, there's a lot to cover. Just in that introduction, I noticed, glass, wood, acrylic, resin, food samples, metal, and ceramic. So one of the questions I have for you, Hannah, for those who haven't seen the work on display at Blue Valley Library, describe for us what they can expect to see.
Well, the bio kind of gives a great example about what you might see at the show. There's just such a wide range of materials that I work in, and I wanted to show that at Blue Valley. The works are sort of displayed as a showcase or sort of displayed individually as groups or sections. So they're not meant to be viewed as objects that come together to make one whole piece, but more so to be viewed as little sections and different displays of the different materials that I work in. So there's everything from 3D printed PLA plastic vessels that I do. There's laser etched plywood. There's CNC milled walnut wood with LED lights to illuminate a laser etched acrylic piece. So there's a lot of different works that require digital technology, but also traditional processes like photography and like handwork and stuff like that. So if you were to be viewing the works, there's a sort of a neutral side on the right and then a colorful side on the left. And on the left, there's also some prints that you may see that you are actually showing on the screen right now, an example of one of the macro images that are printed on some archival paper and then framed and hung. So wide variety of work, like I typically do. So wanted to kind of show that a little bit.
Yeah, let's talk about the different materials that you use. Um, you have quite an extensive background. So, what influenced you to direct your work this way, handling all of these different materials?
Well, it's actually funny. I thinking back, growing up as a child, I mean, I was always interested in art, and I knew I always wanted to go to art school. I thought that that was just like the coolest thing ever when I was, in elementary school and middle school growing up. And my view of art was quite limited just to like drawing and painting and more accessible forms of art making when I'm young. Um, and through that love of art, I was always taking classes. And in high school, actually, all of the drawing and painting classes filled up, and I was only left with one art class available to me, which was three-dimensional art. And I was so bummed. I was like, I don't want to do this. I wasn't interested in 3D work. And I was like, well, I want an art credit. So of course I just signed up for it and ended up just falling in love with working with my hands and, feeling clay and cutting wood. And it just kind of opened my eyes and mind to these other forms of making that I never really had access to. And it completely transformed my trajectory. And I ended up taking AP art and 3D sculpture making, and then ended up applying to Kansas City Art Institute and studied sculpture there. And my time at KCAI, I was really in between what I wanted to do, if I wanted to go into sculpture or if I wanted to go into ceramics. And I ultimately chose sculpture because I thought that I could take as many ceramics classes on top of the sculpture curriculum. I was drawn to the sculpture curriculum because I got to work in different materials that was other than just clay. Not that clay is less than anything else, but it was interesting to me to be able to learn how to weld and have some more woodworking classes and really dive into different processes. And so I was learning all these different techniques in sculpture and then also taking ceramics courses and electives to kind of build my clay experience. But they ended up having one semester a class that was digital design and fabrication for the artist. And that was taught by Joe Cam, who is a researcher and development um, like artist who works at Dimensional Innovations. And he is pretty, he's a huge inspiration to me because he's who introduced me to laser cutting, 3D printing, and CNC milling. And that was actually before the Arts Institute had the Fab Lab where I currently work. And so we were actually going to the Metropolitan Community College Fab Lab and using their space. And that class changed my entire mode of making because then I was introduced to these tools that gave me a form to then start producing these new types of work. And I think once you're introduced to these types of processes and you're kind of like experimenting with what can be done, it's so hard to go back because your mind starts working in these other ways and making these new connections. So it's kind of a long background story, but it really has been interesting because I feel like it's almost been happy accidents that have led me to these really like life altering processes that have really influenced my work and what I do currently now.
Yeah, that is so interesting. I was wondering if you can talk about the macro series. We have several photographs of close-ups of looks like fruit mainly, but different types of food. So what interests you? Let's talk about these close-up details of food. What interests you about this particular subject matter for a
Yeah.
photographic
Um,
series?
I, I mean, the simple answer is I love food. I think food and ingredients in general are just, they're beautiful. I think there's so much color and form and texture that is just naturally within these ingredients, and they can't really be reproduced or replicated any other way. And I also think that I think foods can be sometimes very easily overlooked. Like you're just, making your dinner real quick, or you're not really looking at what you're eating or you're being served. And once you really take the time and care to sit down and look at what you're cutting or making or eating or just looking at the store, there's so much information there. And I think it's really cool to highlight the inner worlds of all of these ingredients that we commonly have access to.
What goes into this kind of leads into my next question about your creative process
Mm-hmm.
and what your studio life is like. Um, so, for example, what goes into preparation work for for any kind of um, work you're doing, like your 3D work? What goes into that process of creation?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it's so different depending on the project or the idea that I have, but it always starts with my sketchbook. I have my sketchbook and I'm, sketching out forms and ideas. Um, and doing some math, trying to figure out what pieces of wood that I might need and how thick they need to be, and um, really doing a lot of planning and research. That's always the beginning. And then I start to dive into the actual making of the forms in a digital program first. So I go into a CAD program. I use Rhino. It's the love of my life. I all of my works, they have touched Rhino at some point in the process. They don't always get made completely in Rhino, but Rhino will help me lay out the work on material to see how much material I need, or Rhino will help me three-dimensionally mock up the forms to see how it looks in space. Because when you're working in 3D, it's so helpful to actually see it in the round versus your mind trying to conceive of the different sort of viewpoints. So a lot of it is planning it out in Rhino, or just playing in Rhino and seeing what type of forms I can create. So, for example, those 3D printed vessels that I have in a line going at the show, they are all made in Rhino, and they were not sketched out beforehand. They were just made purely through play. And it's by making flat vectors and building them out into space and then creating surfaces around them to create, walls. And so, like every process is so different, but Rhino and planning and laying out is a huge part of it. And then testing is the next huge step of all my works. I will usually have multiple iterations of everything I do just to test the size of something or the tolerance fits of something or just the colors or if this will even work the way I'm expecting it to. And so a lot of planning, testing goes into that. And then it's producing and making, and it looks different for every process that I do, but either the machine's producing it for me or I'm telling the machine to do a certain thing and it relays that information back to the work. And then a huge other part of the process of my work that I think is sometimes not always it's sometimes overlooked for a lot of artists, and it's actually like documenting the work and getting it out in the world and getting it on the website and editing that documentation. And so there's a lot of behind the scenes planning and testing and documentation and editing that goes into every single piece. It can take hours upon hours to make work, and it can take a couple hours to just print something. So it just really, really depends on the process.
What is your favorite part of that process?
My favorite part, I think the most satisfying part is seeing the work in real life, because you're going to be used to seeing it in this digital program for so long, and then once you actually see it come together, it's like a magical moment where you're able to see it in scale and in different lights, and see it in the actual environment that you plan on putting it in versus just like a gray background on a CAD program. So I think that's the most satisfying and enjoyable part. Or like when you put something together and they fit for the first time, and it's all coming together in real life. That's really nice to see.
Yeah, that makes me want to know about where do you go to access the technology that you need to do your art, to create your art. We have a makerspace at Johnson County Library, and we have CAD machines. We've got 3D printers and other things like that. Where do you go?
So I'm so lucky because at my job where I work at the Beale Studios, we have access to laser cutting, 3D printing, CNC milling. And so that's where I'm able to have, so much access to create these works. I teach students there how to, dive into these processes themselves. And so that also gives me a lot of experience to just play around and, um, you know, uh, have all this wealth of knowledge just because I've been helping these students for so long. I've been working there for the last 3.5 years now. And then I also worked there as a work study student for my last year as a senior at KCAI. So I'm very, very connected to the Art Institute's Fab Lab at the Beale Studios. And I'm so lucky that I have that access through my job.
Yeah, thank you for that. So I wonder if we can dive into, you provided a list of books and
Yes.
music that has informed your craft. And we've got some covers here. What can you tell us about these books and some music that you've recommended too? What made you want to recommend these particular books?
Yeah, these books and articles and surveys are just super influential to who I am as an artist, but also a human in person. So um, the tech book, let's just start there. That's probably the simplest one to go with. That's the Bullseye 2020 tech book. Bullseye is an incredible company that produces kiln form glass. And they create these incredible journals and articles full of all these, high information specs that you might need for all different types of processes with glass making. It also gives you just all these interesting processes that people have experimented with. And it's really just like the kiln form glass Bible, if you will. Alinea is hugely inspiring to me. Grant Achatz is the chef and co-owner of the restaurant Alinea, and he is just really known for his gastronomy, and he creates these really progressive cuisines and takes art and science and food and creates this incredible experience that I've personally never had, but can dream of going to one day to the restaurant. They have the book Alinea, which just kind of highlights all these different recipes and different processes that they use. And then there's also a Netflix documentary series called Chef's Table, and season 2, episode 1 is Alinea, and I can watch that every week for the rest of my life and find something new to get inspired by. His story and dedication and just the way he pushes food is just really inspiring to me. Humans by Brandon Stanton is also the person that runs Humans of New York. It's a Facebook or sort of like blog page, and it highlights humans in our world that are living at the same time we are. And I think people are so inspiring and we have so much to offer to this world, and community and humans are everything. And I think if we got to learn or open our eyes and minds to other people's stories, that the world would be more understanding and empathetic. And I think that book just really helps ground you to be the empathetic person that everyone can be. And it just shows all the different cultures and wide varieties of life that walk, our country. So really inspired by just the people in this world. There's people all around us that are doing incredible things and have incredible experiences that should be shared. So I love that he highlights that. And experimental eating is actually a really cool sort of survey that highlights contemporary art practices that involve food or some sort of relationship to ingredients. And there's, 10s or 20s or 30s of highlights of different artists and sort of groups that do different things like photography or even social practice, community interaction, there's design and there's science. There are all different types of spectrums in this book, but it really highlights the range that people are doing with art and food and science that I think are really cool. There's an interesting sort of business, I think you could call it a business, called Conflict Kitchen that was highlighted in this book. That was really inspiring to me in 2017. They've since closed, but it was part of, I want to say Tyler University, but it was in Philadelphia, and they were a restaurant that served cuisine from different countries that the United States were in conflict with. And they did that by serving different recipes, but also by having events and performances and publications that helped open people's minds up to those regions that the United States were in conflict with. That is just done so well with food, I think, because food is a universal thing. Everyone needs it, and it just shows so much about culture and religion and time and access that I think it's beautiful. So, examples.
That is all very interesting, and I think it helps illuminate your work. And I really appreciate you sharing what you've how you've been inspired and influenced by these books. Mm-hmm. Hannah, it's been a pleasure speaking with you about you and your work. I encourage everyone to go visit the Blue Valley Library until April 21st. You can see some of Hannah's photographic work and her sculptures as well.
Yes.
Yeah. It's all pretty amazing to see. So if you'd like to learn more about Hannah and her work, her website, artbyfine.com, you can also find her on Instagram at FineHannah. And for more information on Johnson County Library programs and services, please visit jocolibrary.org. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you
You,
so
Hannah.
much. Thank you.